Welcome to the Michael Ouzas podcast.
Welcome back to the Michael Ouzas podcast. Today we welcome Charles McTavish. Chuck and I go back pretty good amount of time. There was a time where I was living in Ottawa for my off seasons and looking for a rink to train at, and that's where I met Chuck. He's got a pretty awesome story. He had one of the most successful goalie schools in the entire Ottawa area. He's trained the best goalie on the planet for a number of years. He was a goalie coach in the OHL with the Ottawa 67s for a couple of years, did the under 17 camps. And now he's currently employed by the Arizona Coyotes, working with their farm team in Tucson, Arizona. How's it going, Chuck? Welcome to the podcast.
It's going well. Thank you. That's a heck of an intro. So hopefully I can live up to half of that.
Well, that's your story. So I thought might as well tell the listeners, about you and kind of a quick thing, how we met. So let's jump right into it. So let's talk about your journey from playing and getting into coaching, building the goalie school. Let's start from the start. How'd you get into playing and hockey?
Well, playing since I can breathe. And to be honest, I didn't have a really long or incredibly successful playing career. I stopped playing after junior hockey for a number of reasons. I loved the position of goaltending, everything about it, but I don't think my body loved it. So I had some pretty bad hip issues, and to be honest, I probably just wasn't as good as I needed to be to continue to develop and grow with the game. So I kind of turned to coaching pretty early. I was 21 and started coaching just small, like I would imagine most people do in minor hockey, and met some good people that helped me along the way. And it kind of organically grew from there. I certainly didn't set out to have a big goalie school or work with, certain guys or a number of goaltenders. It just grew organically, which now that I look back, I kind of really appreciate that process and not trying to force anything. So the coaching career has been a lot kinder than my playing career, a little less physically painful as well. And I kind of stuck with it 20 years later. Wait, how old am I? Yeah, 20 years later. And very fortunate to be in this position with the Coyotes, and we're still trucking along.
That's awesome. And you said it like it grew organically, but I mean, Chuck, I know you well, and I'm sure it's not a fluke that it grew the way it did over 20 years. That's for sure. So let's talk about that organic growth. Like when you started in Ottawa, like what was that like from where you started, and like how you built it into what you built it into in Ottawa?
Yeah, so I grew up in Ottawa, played in Ottawa, based in Ottawa, and when I say grew organically, I guess at the beginning I didn't set out to achieve, to essentially create a huge goalie school and a big following. Social media wasn't really even a thing then, so like that wasn't a factor. It was more just staying in the game, because I felt like I left it way too early to not want to stay in the game. So that part of it was organic. After I kind of got rolling, was very passionate about it, and loved that side of the game. Then, I started intentionally putting some more effort into actually trying to sustain a living, I guess, coaching in different ways. I think there's a distinction between instructing and coaching, and running a school and working with a team. So making the decision to manage those two facets of this position is a challenge, especially if you want to continue as a coach. I think you need to coach with the team on a regular basis, but until you get to a certain point, it's not always the easiest to put, especially when you're younger, to keep the roof over your head, so to speak. So you're constantly kind of doing both to sustain kind of your day to day. So there was a point in time where I thought, let's push for the, a little bit more of the business side and the school component of it. And that started to grow. And then you just start doing what you can to be able to meet the demand and the need. Put a lot of really good people around me. And I think that was a huge part of our growth, is establishing a network and partnerships with other really good coaches and keeping an open mind and that sort of thing, which helped a lot. And eventually we opened up a school in a facility in Ottawa, and it was a 12,000 square foot facility. Essentially, it was a big open warehouse. We built a rink and a gym, and at one point in time there was physio and all sorts of stuff. There's been many things in the building since then, and I've since left just in the last 2 years since getting this position. But yeah, it was 10 years of my life operating a business from that standpoint too, with the school and the building together.
Wow. And I definitely want to get into the building because it's a pretty incredible story, I think. So one thing you said, there's a difference between instructing and coaching. Can you unpack that a little bit? Like what does that mean to you? And if someone's looking to get into coaching, whether it's in, hockey, sports, this podcast also is relative to real estate. Coaching is a big aspect of all of it. And can you talk a bit about the difference between instructing and coaching?
Yeah, it's something that I learned a little bit later as I was on that journey. I think the ability to teach the position is one thing, but then to be part of a team dynamic and work with a staff and have the goalies within a team environment, within a team structure, the highs and lows of the day-to-day, the travel, depending on your level, obviously, it's a totally different animal. So to have that, September to hopefully May season and grind and the ups and downs that go with that versus maybe seeing somebody on a weekly basis on a rink and teaching them the skill sets required to play the game, even if you were doing video and helping them from a tactical standpoint, it's not the same as submersing yourself in the environment with the team. The emotion's different. The energy on a day-to-day is different. The challenges are different. So I think if you can have both experiences, I think you're all the better for it. If you want to have a career with a team and coach at a junior or AHL or even in, maybe for a national program or in the NHL, I think it is important that eventually you work with a team on a regular basis and become part of that staff.
Yeah, and it's a totally different dynamic, right? Because when you get someone that comes in for, let's say, an hour on a whatever Tuesday night, and it's a very controlled environment, you control where the shooters go, you control every single aspect of that training session. You might even just be trying to work on one little element and build it over 8 weeks, but 8 weeks in a hockey season is like an eternity. You might have played 20 games, and there's so many ups and downs and travel and stuff. So to have the ability to differentiate the two, I think is huge, and definitely something necessary at your level for sure. And as you're going to keep progressing, I'd imagine it's huge.
Yeah, and I would say instructing, it's very specific to the how. Like, this is how you implement these skill sets. This is how you develop them. And working with a team, it's more of a when and the where, and a little bit of the why. Obviously, get some why with the skill development component too. But it's applying those skill sets on a daily basis and creating the habits and coming up with a plan to use the skill sets. Like, that happens more in a team environment. So there's a big difference there.
Yeah, and especially at your level now, is everyone can play. Everyone's got their, to go up the pyramid to get to, if you're an American League goalie, you're right there, right? Like, your next step is obviously you want to get to the NHL. So everyone's gone through a lot of the ranks to get up to that level before they're working with you on a daily basis, right? So that's really awesome. I think how you can decipher the two and have a, good combination of both in your career and how you've been able to apply them. I still want to talk a little bit about the goalie camp and the goalie thing. And one thing that you did, I think, that I'd never seen before, and actually it was a big reason why, I mean, obviously I stuck with you for years, and I really love the environment that you created there. And um, you brought in a bunch of other great coaches, and you guys all worked as a team in order to like bring, I can't exactly call it one product, but you guys were bringing a product of goaltending together. and typically, at least here in Toronto, and at least for a long period of time here, and I know it is starting to change now over the last couple of years, like it was very much like, this is one person's camp, this is how everything's done, this is how you do it, and this is like the only way. And unless you're going to every single person's camp, you might not get 6 different voices who are all really good coaches, who are all going to give you different tactics that you can apply. And you did that. You've been doing that for years. And that collaborative teaching is something that I learned from you. And I'd love for you to unpack that. Like, how did you come up with the idea to put that into like your goalie program in Ottawa?
Um, I, I always just thought that, well, first of all, it's impossible for one person to have all the answers in anything. And I really liked, I mean, hey, it's kind of like this podcast, picking the brain of other people and trying to understand how they see something and their side of it. So, I mean, at the end of the day, like simply put, more heads are better than one. The process in getting the right people, I think, was actually more of a challenge than just the idea of coaching by committee, because you want to make sure you get like-minded people enough that you're not butting heads on everything, so you can make progress. Good quality character humans, and people that are kind of in it the same way you are. And our staff really felt like a team, like we felt like a hockey team. It was kind of cool in that sense that you'd have, we do camps in the summer, and we'd have 5, 6, 7 coaches sitting in the dress room, and usually, I've been in camp situations where, you have your head guy and those other guys are helpers. Well, in our camps, like at any given time, one guy was leading a session or be responsible for a day or a concept or whatever you name it. And I think the most powerful things for us as coaches is we wanted to learn from the other guys, even if you saw them every day. And we would often invite other coaches in for summer and stuff so that we could all learn together. And we got to the point where other coaches were calling and saying like, hey, I'd love to help out at your camp. I know so-and-so is there and so-and-so is there. And it actually became more about working with the other coaches, almost like in a symposium sort of style. And we actually once a year in the summer, we did a kind of internal symposium where we'd have like 15, our core guys, our guys that could only help out once in a while, and maybe some, friends of our group get together, grab some pizza and some beverages on a night. We'd close down the rink and we'd just go on the ice for 4 hours with a junior goalie, a minor hockey goalie, and an elite goalie, and we would just hash out ideas. And so we all came out of those sessions feeling like, better coaches and having a better understanding. And, you'd go to bed thinking about things a little differently than before. And I just think that it was good for all of us. And man, it accelerated my growth as a coach for sure. It was the best decision I ever made. I didn't know why at the time, but I knew I did not want to call the goalie school Charlie's goalie school. And I very quickly realized, like, I'm glad I didn't put my name on it. It's not about that. It's about this group of people bringing the same or similar message in a like-minded, positive way.
Yeah, that's incredible. And I've been a part of that environment too, and it's pretty awesome to hear the ideas from everybody. And you definitely learn, because you it's almost like you can't be in an environment like that and get better. It's an environment that everybody's there and everyone's going to push themselves and ask great questions, and like there's a level of curiosity there that's going to push the envelope forward. Because when you leave that and you have a question like, oh, like, how do we figure this out, chances are someone's going to go figure it out, or someone's going to find a solution, and then everyone's going to grow together, right? And that's pretty awesome. And yeah, you were the first person that taught me about collaboration in the space, because I'd never really seen it before, coming from Toronto and then living in Ottawa. Here's the thing: you built a rink to start all this stuff, and I want to like unpack this, because you're the only person that I ever known that actually like put a rink together. And like, where did like, where did this come from? Where did the idea come from? How did it happen? How did you just wake up one day and were like, all right, I'm going to build a rink and this is where it's all going to go down? Like, what is, let's unpack that. And at the time, it's like, let's hear it.
Well, to be honest, it came totally from necessity. So we got to a point, especially in season, trying to get ice in the Ottawa area was next to impossible. A lot of it is controlled by the city. They allocate ice to the groups and associations and everybody that needs it, rightfully so. And whatever was left over would go on sale. I don't remember if it was like May 1st or August, whatever the date was, it would go on sale for that season. And there would be a lineup outside City Hall like you were waiting for a concert. People would come there and wait with their lawn chairs at 2:00 in the morning so they could get ice. This is just not nothing to do with goaltending or goalie coaches. This was just coaches and instructors and whoever else in the entire city wanted more ice. That's how you got it. So, after a couple early mornings, after a couple years and trying to scrape and claw for the ice required, even just to get out for an hour, with the guy, I thought, okay, I've been to places where I've seen little studio rinks jammed in between the boards and the walls of another rink. And, I was actually in a tournament in Toronto and saw this tiny little sliver of ice created in between the wall and the boards and kind of opened my eyes. I'm like, well, we don't need a full size rink. I'd like to be adequate enough that, an NHL goalie could go out there and feel comfortable. So I knew it had to be big enough, but it certainly didn't need to be a full size ice. Maybe there's a way, and there was one there actually was one at the Minto rink in Ottawa, and they had a little pad, and it was ideal. And I grew up training on that, but there was the only one in the city, and so it came from that necessity that I thought, like, maybe I could make one. Like, it was just a bit of a long shot and a dream. And I guess like I kind of felt like Field of Dreams, Kevin Costner, for the longest time. Like, hey, if I build it, they'll come eventually, So that was a heck of a process getting that going. I was 26 years old. I was in no shape financially getting into a project like that because you need a substantial amount of space. But what I did find was eventually I found a space, and I did find investors that were willing to purchase the building so that I could create the space inside the building and build this rink. And I guess the advantage to them is they knew they had a tenant from day one, and they kind of believed in the vision. And so that made it a real estate play for them. And then at the end of it, I got what I needed out of it. So I ended up leasing, but the purchasers were kind of put in place. We found the right building for them to do that. So that's kind of how it started. Probably took a year to build. I had a unbelievable angel investor that, just thought this was a great idea and helped me out financially with that startup cost. But it was still not big enough, substantial enough that I could just go and hire people to build a rink. So it took me about a year, but myself and maybe one or two other guys literally built, the walls and did everything but put up the boards, only because we didn't have the know-how. So, you hire a company, they brought, all the equipment, they did that. We didn't have a Zamboni for the first 2 months. We're shoveling and using a garden hose. The rink ended up being about the size, a little smaller than a zone like Blue Line Inn. It was 50 by 70, 72. So substantial enough. There's 12 creases. And it took up about a third of the size of the building. The building was 12,000 square feet. So in the remaining part of it, there's dress rooms, a little bit of office space. There's a substantial size gym at the front. The idea was just to put everything under one roof that a hockey player, goaltender would need. At first, I thought it would be just for goaltenders, but quickly realized that I probably can't fill every single hour with goalie training. Although there was a point in time where I would say 5 days out of the week. If there's, let's say, 40 to 45 optimal training hours in a week, if you take your weekends and then 5 hours on the weekdays, I'd say 30 of them were all goalie training occupied, which was pretty cool. So it did start growing, and that's when I was really passionate about growing that team of like-minded people. I mean, we did schools and camps in the summer, so that would often be working with other people that sense, but now there was a place for them to call home too. And to be honest, I was really lucky, and there's a lot of people that put a lot of energy into that project and never once asked for any monetary sort of compensation, in the sense that they just thought, hey, this is fantastic. I want to be part of that. I see this is obviously a bit of a business risk financially, but I want to help out. So I'd have guys come by at 10 o'clock at night helping me hang drywall that were just coaches that coached with. From that standpoint, like, the community was overwhelming in getting it off the ground. It was unbelievable. I hired one contractor that he actually knew what he was doing. I kind of knew what I was doing. He led the charge on a daily basis. We got enough up and going that we had some fold out chairs and some mats. Guys would come, they'd go on the ice. And meanwhile, we built the second half side of the rink at night after everybody left. So, I mean, my schedule for about 2 or 3 years was, or I should say about 2 years, is construction heavily for however months it took to get off the ground, just the ice part, because I knew that was the revenue source. Then, do your administrative work during the day, coach in the evening. Everybody'd leave by 9 or 10. I would build with another guy until 1 or 2 in the morning. I'd probably sleep there, maybe go home, get back up, do that again. So took a couple of years probably off my life in the long run. And looking back, like, man, did I ever do it the hard way? But I like, my shoulders still from sweeping. I probably need surgery and still feel the effects of it. But it was a heck of a process, and I'm really grateful for all those people that helped out.
It's pretty amazing. Like, that's kind of the full 360 of what this podcast is. We're talking athletes and coaches and talking about real estate, and you literally are a coach who, found investors, gave them a lease back, put it all together for them, and then coached in the property. Like, it's all encompassing of all of that. And that's why I thought you'd be, an awesome guest for this, because I think it's the coolest, like, it's one of the coolest things I've ever heard is someone who literally builds a rink with their own bare hands out of a necessity, and, just finds a solution to a problem, which is a major problem. If you can't get ice, you can't coach. It's a very simple equation, right? So one other thing, like, when I was in their training, you used to have in Russian goalies come in and train with you. And one of those goalies might go down as probably one of the best goalies to ever play the game at this point, at the rate that he's been playing at. And that's Andrei Vasilevsky. I remember training, when I saw him there, he would have been probably in his late teens, I think, maybe like early 20s, late teens. Like, how did that connection start? Like, what was it like training him for the amount of years that you trained him for? Like what was that evolution like?
Well, his agent is from, at the time, was in Ottawa, and had a relationship with him for actually going way back years and years from when I played. And every summer he would periodically bring guys over. So I think, guys coming from Russia, one thing I really like about some of those goalies is that there's not a ton of, I shouldn't say there's not a ton of coaching, but I would say the level of technical detail wasn't as, I don't want to say important, but it wasn't emphasized a ton in Russia. So part of what this agent would do, he'd see guys with potential and up and coming goalies. And my term is, they knew how to play hockey, but they hadn't learned really how to be a goalie yet. So they learned to read the game. They learned to play the game. They were almost had to survive in some capacity because they didn't have a ton of coaching. And then once they had that knowledge of the game on how to make reads and play in that environment, he would bring them over to North America 14, 15, and then they would actually learn the technical aspect of it. It's kind of the total opposite of what we do, at least here in Canada, is I find like we drill the technical aspects in the skill development, but the kids become a bit robotic and they actually don't learn to read the game, which you see kind of affect them not so much in their youth, but a little bit later on down the road. Those are skill sets that they have to learn. So that he would bring guys over, and worked with some of them, and he just said like, hey, I got a pretty good prospect here. And he came over, and actually at first he was working with myself, and here, back to your question about collaboration, my goalie coach at the time was in Ottawa was Tom Dempsey, who was 10 years with the Ottawa 67s. And Tom worked with Hasek when he was in Ottawa, and Fleury when he was in Cape Breton. They would fly him to Cape Breton. So he was like, I call him the godfather of goaltending in Ottawa. So he's a great mentor. And he actually came and he worked with Tom. And then so Tom invited me out and said, hey, like, come check out some of these prospects. So there was a couple summers where I'd help Tom out and with some other goalie coaches even. And then it just came to be that I ended up developing a bit of a relationship with Andre specifically. And then part of, I would be lying if I said part of the coaching process, having that facility, having access to ice at any time that I could customize his training and programming was huge. So that was an asset. Like, as much as I want to think that, I'm a decent coach, that was part of it for sure, which was great. So there was probably 4 or 5 years that we'd come every summer for 2 months. He kind of had a billet around the corner. When he was old enough, he'd rent a truck and got around, stayed a little bit at my house when needed in between some housing, and little funny little things like teaching him how to barbecue. He never used to barbecue before. Like, almost burns his eyebrows off the first time, and stuff like that was pretty. And that's a lot of guys that come over to North America, and that's not just him. That's a lot of those guys just hadn't been exposed to some of those things that we take for granted every day. So that was a really interesting part of working with some of the Russian guys and specific, I guess, European countries, is just the lifestyle is just totally different. They're a fish out of water. So interesting mentoring them on those things as well. But you could tell pretty quickly, obviously, that Andre had some pretty special abilities. I don't think anybody could predicted that he would have had the success that he's had, but just when he was 17 or 18, it's impossible. But you just certainly knew he was gifted and special in a lot of ways. And he's, one of the hardest working guys I'd work with. And he made the right decisions and did the right things on a daily basis, had good habits. He'd be waiting for me at the door to leave in the morning. Like, if I said we were leaving at 8:30, he'd be standing there at 8:20 going, like, looking at his watch, doing this while I was brushing my teeth or something. So it was like, hey, you said we were leaving at this time, and he would not be a minute late, even though it's like I was going there because I had to be there to do other things. He was just coming with me. So it's not even like it was urgent for him. It was more like you said. So he held me accountable even at a really young age, as much as I held him accountable. So he was obviously a pleasure to work with, and it was a great experience.
Yeah, that's awesome. And obviously now, like, I mean, we're goalie nerds, and like, this guy is on a different planet I think right now in the league, it's pretty impressive to watch, at the level he's at right now, and a couple cups and another cup run, and it doesn't it's not a fluke, that's for sure.
No, not at all.
So from the goalie camp or the goalie school and the whole thing you had there to the OHL, and now, like you were saying, you went from the instructional side to the coaching side, and now you're your first opportunity with the Ottawa 67s in the OHL, which is that's a big deal. Like, you're coaching in the best junior league in the world. What was that step like for you, going from an instruction side to, like, now with a team coaching full time?
Well, I certainly stepped into an unbelievable situation with the Ottawa 67s and the coaching staff and management, everybody they had in place there before I got there, with Andre Tournier and Mario and Norm Milley and James Boyd is still the general manager. So like the the culture and the program that was set. They were there the year before I got there. That was, I very quickly realized kind of how unique and special that was in that environment. And, it in a lot of ways, it made my job a lot easier to work with guys that conducive to that environment, and having the players buy into that. It was very fortunate. I came home and would say to my wife often, like, I'm the most fortunate guy in the world to have had this position with this team. Like, it's not, it's incredible. So, I mean, the step was big, but that certainly made it a lot easier, is working within that environment. And then I had some really good people and some good goalies to work with too. So it was kind of a unique situation. Probably the two guys that I started with were the two guys that I kind of, when I left the organization, one left and the other one was still there. So I actually really only worked with the same two guys for 3 years, and had some success with them. And we went on a deep run in my first year, lost to Guelph in the finals. And then unfortunately in that second year, COVID shut the league down right before the playoffs. But we had a really, really good team again and expected to go deep again. So that was a bit of a heartbreaker, obviously. But I learned, that experience, especially with the staff and the experience that staff had, the difference and importance of working in that environment versus only instructing and doing skill development, like totally two different animals. So I grew more as a person in that first year probably than almost at any other point in my life.
What was the biggest challenge for you going into that team environment?
Probably a little bit of the unknown, and changing some habits that I didn't even realize I had. And I wouldn't say in a sense that were like a fault of mine. It was just the only way I knew how things were done previously. And then got into that environment and realized, whoa, this is a bit different. For example, typically in that position prior, even working with, CCHL junior teams in the Ottawa area and different organizations and stuff like that, even Hockey Canada and stuff, you go in, you do your job as best you can, you make the biggest impact you can, and then you're out. So even I worked with Pembroke and Smith Falls and had some great experiences, but typically you'd go in for a practice a week and then you would leave, and then you'd come for hopefully a game or two on the weekend and you would leave, but you weren't there all the time. Whereas there, I was there all the time, but the expectations of being there all the time on me as part of that staff, an inclusive part of that staff, was totally different. And that was, the growing that I had to do as an individual, is to realize the responsibilities that I had in that position that I just never had before. So that was my biggest kind of challenge. And it was brought to my attention, I think, on day 3. If you know anything about the Bear, Andre Tournier, he'll, it's one of his best assets. He'll just tell you, and it's not emotional and it's not personal. It's just what's required to do the job. And so this is what you need to do. And he was very direct about that. And so it was a fantastic eye opener. And right from that third day on, I was, I looked at everything differently and then continued to grow from there.
Yeah, that's amazing. And obviously, in that process and that journey now, a couple years later, now you're at the pro level. And I would say it's a pretty quick turnaround from someone who goes, from like what you had your camp going on to the OHL to now you're in the American League. Like that's all within, like, let's say call it less than 5 years that whole thing has turned around. Right. And so now having those couple years in the OHL, what was the experience like going to pro? Because pro it's just different. It's a higher paced, it's more games. It's, you're dealing with guys from all over the place. And typically, there's all these guys have all been really good goalies, like incredible goalies through juniors and stuff. And now they're in pro and they're trying to make it to the NHL, and now they're with you. And what's that like from that transition standpoint?
Well, it's another big jump. And I think the growing the growing pains or the learning curve, I should say, not so much the growing pains, but the learning curve was actually be more on the business side of the game that the guys have to deal with, the players have to deal with, that the coaches have to deal with, and how much can change on a day-to-day. It's that part of it, you don't really realize until you're in it. Working with the team you're with, then working with management. If you're in the AHL, you're kind of constantly having conversations with the NHL team and also the East Coast team, and things are always in transition and always in flux. So managing that kind of that day-to-day communication, I learned very quickly that in almost until the very moment it's about to happen, don't say it's going to happen, because it can change 3 times in 5 minutes. So, I made the mistake early by saying like, hey, you're going to do whatever tomorrow. Well, 1 hour later, I look silly because that had changed twice. And then the guy's looking at me like, what are you talking about? So, little things like that, and learning, dealing with agents and scouts and learning to collaborate with those guys. I guess my position is, and I'm sure it's slightly unique in every organization, but with the Coyotes, I'm the development coach. So I work with all the goalies outside the NHL to help get them to that spot. So I spent a lot of time in Tucson. Obviously, the guys here, as you said, they're right there. So I put a lot of my energy here, but we have a draft pick in Finland that I'll go and see. Actually, a goalie in the OHL that I'll go and see, and then both our goalies in the East Coast are in Atlanta that I'll go and see. So there's a lot of travel. And then, ironically, to come full circle, I'm now the guy that flies in and flies out. So I find that challenging after being with a team every single day. That now I fly into Tucson for a week, want to be part of the staff because that's something that I really, really enjoyed with my time with the 67s, and found a place for my role, not just as a goalie coach, but other components of mentoring and being in the game on the staff. And so I'm trying to balance not flying in and having too much of an opinion, although it's always welcome, because, hey, you weren't here for 10 days. Like, you need to be careful of what you say and how you say it in a way, but then also trying to stay in lockstep with them on a daily basis, even when I'm not here. So I'm kind of like, it's ironic that we talked about it this way, because I'm pulling from both sides all the time. A little bit easier when I go to the other guys, because that's just totally my role. Like, they know I'm coming in. I was in Finland for 4 days, was on the ice as much as humanly possible in that amount of time, getting the most out of it, fly back out. So the in-person relationships are different with every goalie, but then also managing the relationships with their agents and their team's goalie coach and their team's coach and management and their expectations. And so that's been actually drawing back probably to the more instructing days, and honestly dealing with associations and their board of governors and all their volunteer staff and director of player development guys and all that stuff. You're always juggling all these needs. So probably learned a little bit about that. That's helped me out a lot now. Learned about being on a full-time staff in Ottawa, which is helping me out now. So now that I actually never really looked at it quite like that until I started talking about it just now, which is kind of interesting that it's kind of come full circle.
Yeah, it's always a challenge when you're juggling different personalities and different teams and putting it all together. And I think it's a good lesson, like, because I think some of the listeners might be coaches in real estate as well, and they're not with the agent every single day, or the listeners could be goalie coaches or whatever. And what would you say is the number one thing when you are trying to work lock and step with a team and you're not there for maybe the better part of 2 weeks or whatever, 10 days, or you have to fly in and meet someone, you go to Finland for 3 days, 4 days, you're on the ice 2 hours a day, and then you're gone for another month or two. What would you say is probably the best way to get the most impact in, the times that you are there, and how do you stay whatever in communication when you're not there, and how do you stay like involved when you're not in person?
Well, I mean, I'll kind of say it like this. I think assumptions when you're not there can kill you as a coach or the relationship. What you see from afar, there's always layers to it that you don't know. The communication needs to be really, really clear and defined. There's a coach here, Jay Verity, that said words are dangerous, and he meant that in like not in a negative way, but just like they're very impactful. So you need to be very careful of how you say what to whom, because you could say the exact same words to one person that you say to another, but your tone, who you're saying it to, your energy about it can leave totally different tastes in both people's mouths. So your words have a lot of impact. So within the communication, how you're communicating, the clarity of it's really important. The assumptions you make when you're not there and don't have all the information can be really dangerous. So you need to really learn how to manage that. And one way to do that, well, I should say two ways that kind of tie together, is I found a lot of success in making things objective and not subjective. So as a coach, you could see it as my opinion versus your opinion, versus, hey, if we're trying to get from A to B objectively, what's the goal, and were your actions in favor or not in favor of that goal, for what reasons? So now it's not, this is what I think, and from goalie coach standpoint, I want you to hold your glove here, whatnot. It's, well, when the puck's there, if your glove is here, are you closer, or are you farther? Are you in a better position to take X space away, or are you in a worse position? So now it's not my opinion, it's just getting from point A to point B that we can both agree on. And I think that's really helped me manage the communication so that we're on the same page, and it's not just what I think and what that person thinks. It's like, no, we're on the same page in terms of it's an objective sort of, the information's objective and the goal's objective. So that's been a huge adjustment I think I've made, especially, hey, you're working with guys that there's sometimes language barriers, there's time zone barriers, there's stylistic differences, there's assumptions. You got to think some of these guys have been working on the same thing and taught the same thing for 15 years before they even meet you, and they've probably had, could be anywhere from 2, 3, 4 to 7, 8, 9, 10 coaches along the way. So for you to come in and be the 11th coach and say, hey, you need to do it this way, it's like, well, maybe, but so finding a way where it's not so much my opinion, but hey, we're working together objectively has been, I found a lot of success with.
Yeah, and it creates a measurable way of knowing the progress too, right? Like you have a system to be able to measure, like, okay, well, if if the puck is here and you're in this position, like your chances of making that save are X, versus if you're in that position, it's Y. And if you see the video and you see, okay, you're in X position versus Y position more often than not,
Right.
you'll know right away how you can measure like the probability of saves, right? And
Well, and that probably this probably transcends any industry. Having knowing your information and having your information before those conversations is critical. So that's where the analytics and statistics, and however you want to break that down, can become really important and a really useful tool. Because before we have those conversations, you just said, the odds, the chances that this is going to happen. Well, I actually, not, again, objectively, not my opinion, every time that happens, there's a 36% chance that this happens. That's a National Hockey League wide statistic taken by 10 guys in a room every single night. That's not Charlie's opinion anymore. So did we set ourselves up for success given those statistics, yes or no, based on the environment or the situation. So that's actually a key piece of the puzzle that maybe I didn't elaborate enough on. It's like, I'm sure when you're speaking with a client, I'm guessing on a sale price or something, I'm sure that, your client has something in mind for their house, and maybe it doesn't totally match up, but if you have the information that, hey, now this becomes objective, there's 5 houses sold for this price in the last 2 months that are in your neighborhood, and this is what they had. So now it's easy to compare that. It's not Mike's opinion, it's the market's opinion.
Yeah. And I think that's big. I think data, like the data doesn't lie, right? And I think that's something where it applies to any industry, really. It's like, how do you process that data? How do you have the information? And then when you're going to talk with your, for you, your players, for myself, I'd be, if I'm meeting with clients, I want to have all the information in like clear cut data that I can, talk it over with them and present it where, this is the info that we have. Let's make the most of it and the most kind of educated process moving forward with that data, right? So goaltending was the same. Like, if you're in X position and you hit that spot, you'll probably make that save, whatever, 94% of the time. That's a pretty good stat for a goalie. But the challenge is to get to that position. But at least like, okay, I got to get there and I'm going to make the save. So
Right.
I think that's huge when it comes to how you're able to communicate with goalies, players, people, clients. Like, you have the data. How do you make the most of it, especially if you're not with them every day, and you guys have access to all the video and stuff, which has totally changed since I played, even the last couple of years. Like my last year, they used to send us the Instat was the app. It'd be like all your saves clipped,
Still is.
but like half of them wouldn't even be like on time, and like it was just like a mess. Whereas like now, I'm sure you guys have it a couple years later to a science where like if a goalie wants to see all his saves in the night, he's got that by midnight and he can see every single whatever he wants, and then you got it too on the coaching side, and it eliminates a little bit of the boundaries, when you're not there. When I was, in the minors back, we're talking back like '09, and I saw the goalie coach like once in the season, one time at practice,
Yes.
like one practice for the whole year. And it was like, that was it. Like, you got him one time and like never saw him again. So yeah, I'm happy you guys have made progress. And, there's a lot of our mutual friends who are doing an awesome job too in the coaching space. It's great for the goalies, because if we would have had that going through the process and the ranks, your upside is way better than not,
Oh
right?
yeah.
Um,
And on the technology, the video side of it, I don't even know how you could have done this job the way we do it now without the video and access to that stuff, because I see every single game that every single goalie plays in our system, and even our again, back to the collaboration, our head goalie coach in Phoenix, Corey Schwab, and then our scout Clay Adam, like we collaborate on opinions on things all the time. Like Clay will send us, hey, check out these, this game from so and so that I'm watching, or these clips, and Schwab will do the same, and I'll do the same. And it's like we do that, and we have forms, we have the information, and we can have a discussion within an hour. Where like, how do you do that 10 years ago? Like, I don't know how I would have kept track of 6 guys that I'm not on their team 6 years ago. It's totally different.
you don't really. The odd
Yeah,
phone call, that's about it. But back,
yeah.
like, I mean, when you think about that, like '08, '09, like iPhones were just coming out. Like, really, when you break it down like that, like, it's not like we had tech like this. Like, you
Oh,
couldn't even, you're calling someone on your flip phone to say
yeah.
what's up. It's totally
And
different.
from our standpoint, and my standpoint, it's fantastic to have it for those purposes. And as a coach, it's another thing to manage though, because it can impact a player negatively if they're constantly looking at everything they've done all the time and overthinking and overanalyzing. It can actually go the other way for the individual if they don't manage their own attention to that as well. So like everything, there's pros and cons to blessing and a curse, but like most probably technology used properly, it's a great tool.
Yeah, I think that's the key in in any of it, right? Like what are you using that tech for, and how are you using it to your advantage versus like information overkill, or another term I like, infobesity. Like it's just an incredible amount of
Never
info
heard
where you're,
that. I like
yeah,
that.
where you're just like getting a ridiculous amount of information all the time, and it's hard to decipher. Like I remember a goalie coach, and you met my coach Panks, and we had spoken about this. We had a very simple, like it was like a 95-5 rule. Like 90% I had to do, if I did the stuff right, the better I got to like a 90 percentile in certain columns. And then 5% of stuff I can never control, and 5% of stuff is like the extra, the bonus, the big saves or whatever. And if I took away from the 90%, it was really hard to make up the other 10%. So having that like structure and measurable skills to make certain saves in certain positions allowed me to have more consistent games over time, because the other two like are just going to happen as a byproduct of the 90. The other 10% will just take care of itself.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a bit of a you make your own luck, and I believe that to a
Yeah.
certain extent, in the sense that if you look at the glass half full and see the positivity in it, and then where you put your attention is where you put your energy, and that's what you perceive, then that's the direction you're going in. You won't even see as many negative bad luck situations or things out of your control, and your energy will go down that path. And I think you will, in a sense, create your own luck that way more often than you don't. So I totally agree with you.
Yeah. It's the information when used well can really help you to your advantage, right? And Chuck, let's flip it over to real estate a little bit, and something. I mean, your mom's been in real estate for a long time, and you know you have investment properties, and part of this podcast, I think it's great to talk to, you know, coaches and athletes who have, you know, had real estate along the journey. Because if you're going to be a coach or an athlete for 10 years or whatever the average lifespan is, there's a chance that, you know, a property could appreciate over that time. And then when you decide to move home, wherever that may be or whenever that may be, now you have a property that's done some work for you in that time. And can you unpack a little bit about, like, you know, maybe some of the investments you made along the way, or like, you know, your thought process when it comes to real estate investing?
Yeah, well, to be honest, I should have done more, but at least I did. At least I did some, and yeah, I was exposed to at least that industry from a younger age. My mom was still is a real estate agent, and so even just, I don't want to say the lifestyle, but just terminology and language and kind of that the life you live of showings and stuff like that. I it's all I knew essentially growing up. So I wasn't afraid of it, because I think a lot of people are afraid of, in a sense, of what that is, because there's a lot of moving parts, there's a lot of big numbers. There's a lot of traditional views on buying a home versus buying an asset, and having that asset actually do work for you on a financial side. So luckily, I think if anything, it didn't make me nervous to get into that industry from an investment standpoint, just being exposed to it at a younger age. So that was probably a huge start. I think going through what I did with the rink, even though I wasn't the purchaser, but having to understand what that looked like in terms of purchasing commercial real estate, which was totally out of my realm at the time, was an interesting learning. And actually learning it without, and then not actually having to do it, was, you know, a bit of an education with less risk in a way. Obviously there's risk when you don't own the asset, but you're paying rent as well, especially on a not that big. But that was a huge part of my learning process. And I ended up buying a house personally at a fairly young age, and had a lot of buddies come and go and be roommates and live in it as well. So I think a combination of some of those experiences when I was younger, one, made me appreciate that industry as a whole and what it could do for you financially, and two, didn't make me afraid of it. Obviously the market's changed. I think you'd know the market in the industry better than I would over the last 10, 15, 20 years. But I think it's been pretty good for the last decade, more than a decade. Obviously, no one could saw COVID coming and what that would do to markets and interest rates and all that stuff. But I think if you got into it a while ago, you're pretty fortunate. And so I did have a personal home. I've had 3 investment properties along the way, as long as personal home. One was sold, but my thought was always, well, I'm just going to have these forever until I retire, whatever. But I think there is some plays that I wouldn't also be afraid to sell for the right reason. Now, if it's just to go and buy a car, that's the wrong reason. But if you're selling because you're making another investment or different real estate plays available, then maybe that's the right reason. Or even if it's for a personal home, maybe that's the right reason too, depending where you are for your life. So it's become a huge vehicle to balance out. Like I said, hey, we didn't, as a coach, until you're kind of close to the top, even in junior hockey, goalie coach, you don't really make enough money to sustain I want to say a normal lifestyle, but like a lifestyle that you could support a family and even yourself at times. So it's just the nature of the beast. So I had to find another way. So that became the other way.
Yeah, that's awesome, and I think it's a great lesson, especially as any coach players are going through the rankings of coaching, right? Like you said, it's great to have another vehicle, another avenue of, if real estate is the thing. And like when you think back at it, like, you did it in a commercial space first, found the investors, did all that stuff, and then, did it for yourself personally as well. It's pretty amazing. And now over time, it's the time that you spend in the market with that stuff over time that, is going to ultimately probably lead to things being successful over that time, right? Especially over the length of a career, which could be 10, 20 years, is a long period of time, for these properties to do their thing for them, regardless of what's happening in and out of the market, right? So
for sure. Yeah. And I think part of that too is you're sometimes you're nervous of what you don't know, and just being curious, I think, was a huge part of that step in being able to pull the trigger on certain real estate deals, in terms of getting the information. So like I said, it's something I was comfortable with at a young age, just because there was terminology in my household from a young age. So that never scared me. Going to the bank kind of made me nervous because I'd never done that before. I thought like banks were, the evil, they're gonna, squeeze you for every penny you have and bend you over and that sort of thing. So I was really nervous going to banks, and I was, nervous doing certain parts of the real estate process that are required, until I learned that the more you communicate, goes back to all the other life lessons we just talked about. The more you communicate, the more you educate yourself. It doesn't have to be scary. It's just part of the process. We were just talking in our coach's room, like, if you don't know anything about cars and you have to fix your car, it's terrifying. But to somebody else who loves cars, they can't wait to open up the manual and try to figure it out. Well, if you've never done real estate, it probably like those are huge numbers, especially in the Toronto market. Like you're talking potentially millions of dollars. And maybe it doesn't have to be millions of dollars. Maybe you only hear those numbers and, hey, that's scary. I don't have $1 million. I can't invest. Well, that's not totally the case either. So yeah, it's a matter of the willingness to educate yourself on all the aspects, so it doesn't become something that makes you as nervous.
that's awesome. I love that. I love that analogy. Yeah, that's incredible. Chuck, this has been an amazing conversation. Thanks so much. You're one of my first guests on this podcast, which I appreciate you coming on. Maybe I should have changed the name and not called it the Michael Ouzas podcast, like you said you did with your goalie camp. But for me, that was actually a bit of a roadblock. Was I didn't know a name, so eventually I was just like, well, this is the name of the show. I'm just going to roll with it and get her started. So I really appreciate you jumping on. If anybody has any questions, is there a way, are you comfortable with anyone reaching out to you? Like, can they reach you on whatever social media or anything to follow along your journey, or reach out if they want to build a rink or something like that?
Hey, yeah. Well, we might need a couple beers out of that conversation, but yeah, absolutely. Just my email, cmctavish@cgdgoalies.com. That was the old school name, but it's an email I still use. I have some social media, but I'll be honest, I'm not on it often, so it's not a great way to communicate. So email would be probably the best if there's any questions. And appreciate you having me on. It was a great chatting about it. I think this idea, the concept for your podcast is a great one. I think there's a lot of people in the position that can kind of help other people. Hopefully, maybe even just this conversation, inspire somebody in a small way just to get started in some capacity. So kudos to you for starting that up. And I think it's perfectly okay that you called it Michael Ouzas podcast, because you text me about a name and I might have given you one or two of the worst suggestions that I've ever come up with. So when you didn't reply, I totally understood.
Yeah. Yeah, you could have. I was actually surprised. I thought you'd give me a better option, but no, it just went
My
for it.
fault. I dropped the ball on that. I'm usually
All
creative.
good. Yeah, all good. Chuck, thanks so much for jumping on. This was great. I think everyone's gonna love it. And yeah, we'll talk soon. Thanks to everybody. And and if you are listening this far in, if you're watching on YouTube, if you can hit that like and subscribe button. And if you're on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, if you can throw a review in there, that'd be great and help get the show out to more people like you who've listened this far in. So thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next one.